Hello.
Hello, Evan. Thanks for
Hello.
kicking off 2024 with us.
Great to be here.
So we have a bunch of questions to go over, and we're going to see if I can do them in order, or there might be a few repeats because I'm looking at
Okay.
them when they're uploaded. But before we go into all of them, I will say, like,
Mhm.
what is your favorite part about being a part of Vue Nation and being able to talk about what Vue is up to?
It's always nice to connect to actual users because answering questions also gives me a lot of information on what people are thinking about, what people care about. So that actually help us to calibrate like what we should focus on in a way. So it's always good to have this kind of opportunity to connect with the community.
Yay, thank you. Okay, to start us off, of View School has reached its end of life, and what happens now?
View 2 has reached end of life.
Oh, I said View
Um,
School because that's like a View. The View School is not end of life, y'all. View Two. See if I can talk today.
Yeah, so it's reached end of life. We do have a dedicated page on the Vue v2.vjs.org website that outlines all the information you need to know about it. But long story short, Vue 2 is now essentially so the code is still there. All the distribution channels still there. It's still on the CDNs. It's still on npm. You can keep using it as you'd used before. The only difference is that it won't receive new versions. There will be no more Vue 2 releases, which means there will like if you find a bug or something, which I'm sure there could still be, but it's unlikely to be fixed anymore because officially the maintenance is now over, and we want the reason for doing that is really we have limited bandwidth and really want to focus whatever we have on the current active and the future version of Vue. So we believe Vue 2 has served its purpose. It's been hugely successful. It's been a lot of people have been built great things with it. And in a way, we feel it's already in a pretty good place. We don't feel like it's necessary to keep splitting our attention to two major versions at the same time. Most of the applications that's running on Vue 2 probably has been doing so for quite a few years, and if it's been running great, then that's great. Um, so the only exception would be, products or companies that have, requirements or compliance policies that prevent you from using end-of-life software in stuff you ship to your users. In those cases, there is also an option because we have partnered with Hero Devs, which is the company that specializes in end-of-life support for software has reached end of life. So it's going to be a paid service because it's essentially offered outside of the free software maintenance that we've been previously been doing, but that's kind of a niche requirement. Usually, you'd only need that if you have very specific compliance requirements that require you to do that.
Awesome, thank you. And there's a lot of detail there, so I appreciate you going into all of that. Totally switching gears. How does a Vite 5 improve Vue performance?
Vite 5 has doesn't have anything specific to do with Vue performance. Vite has become framework agnostic for a very long time. So most of the performance work we do in Vite is specifically for Vite. Like the recent focus has been mostly on like the resolution performance, like file resolution in Vite, optimizing the file system access, optimizing the watcher, things like that. That should benefit Vue users using Vite, of course, but it's not Vue specific. It will benefit anyone who's building on top of Vite. Yeah. So I guess one relevant part is you do need to upgrade to the latest version of the Vite.js slash plugin Vue to get the most out of 3.4. It works with the older versions, but when you upgrade, there is some internal updates that leverages the new AS2 reuse in 3.4. So will likely improve your build performance by a bit.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. Are we expecting any further Vue.js macros added to the Vue core functionality?
Um, so this is a good question. So obviously we added define model in 3.3 and then stabilized it in 3.4. I think in general we have been very careful in adding more macros because we already have quite a few, right? Um, so macros are interesting because they're kind of like introduces compiler magic into your normal JavaScript code. So you would only want to do that when it provides very concrete benefits that help us improve the DX without much drawbacks, right? So having too much of this could be confusing, or it could be I guess we just want to be really careful on introducing macros, making sure. I guess the criteria is we want to make sure macros are only introduced when the problem is only best solved via a macro, but not through a runtime option or a vanilla JS API. Right. So that is the criteria. Define model is one of those things that we believe, the macro really greatly simplifies the way component V model works. So that's totally worth it. But all the other ones uh, could be, some of them could be niche, some of them could be done via a runtime option. So we're always but I guess our strategy is essentially we put a lot of these things that we're not so sure about into the Vue macros project, so you can use them without committing it without adding it into Vue core, right? The reason we're careful is because whatever we add into Vue core, it's got to be there forever. We can't remove it, we can't break it, right? So having them in Vue macros kind of gives us this sort of I guess a good place for us to throw in these experimental ideas to get more user feedback without committing it to the long-term maintenance, avoiding, like, basically allows us to have the opportunity to still tweak or change it or decide that it's not going to be going to go in core. So I guess going back to the question, in the short term, we don't have any new macros plan at the moment,
I
but
like
we're
that
happy to.
you
Mhm.
I was just going to say, I like that you talked about how we're still going to go through and test things and see what will work and if it is
Mhm.
something to be committed full time. Cool, thank you. What's the latest on Vue Vapor mode?
So Vue Vapor mode has been undergoing development for quite a while. So we've if you go the repository is actually open source, so you can go check on the status at Vue.js/core-vapor. So right now we've implemented the basic runtime. We've implemented a large chunk of the compilers. So we already have a playground where you can see how a component will be compiled in Vapor mode. You can have basic functionality. Some of the directives are implemented. So right now the focus is on the vif and v4 directives. So once we have these two, we'll actually be able to build a full to-do MVC demo in Vapor mode. So that is the current goal. And once after that, we will focus on solving the component model, making sure I guess that's going to be probably the most challenging part is making sure Vapor's component model can interop with the current V3 virtual DOM. So we want to be able to embed Vapor components inside current virtual DOM based Vue applications and vice versa. Uh, so we are close to getting to that part.
Follow up on that question. Will the ecosystem, like component libraries, need to be migrated to support it?
No. So Vapor is completely opt-in, which means so let's say you have a Vue 3 application today. So the way you'd use Vapor is not doing a big bang switch. You would only opt into Vapor mode for maybe a new component, or you can migrate some of your components that require high level of performance over to Vapor mode, right? So because the initial offering a Vapor mode will only be a subset of the Vue features, right? For example, it probably, the first testable version of Vapor will probably come without transition support, come without suspense support. It's only just the core directives. and components, but that should be enough for you to build a large, a portion of the components that you need high performance, right? So I think in the early stages, you would really use Vapor as kind of like an opt-in feature to enhance the performance for the like very performance sensitive critical parts. And while we adding more feature parity along the way, eventually you'll be able to maybe build a whole app with Vapor.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And we're going to switch gears again really quick, just because I think it is the tech side of things, but also like the people-y side of things of looking back, what was the most challenging aspect creating Vue, and how did you overcome it?
The most challenging aspect was probably figuring out, how I can make a living off of it. um, I think the thing is, Vue started as a really like a, it's a side project, it's a personal project, it's still an independent project, right? So we don't have the backing of big corporations. We don't have, I guess the natural trust you get from people by just say, oh, it's from Google, it's from Facebook, and this must be good, right? So in the early stages, it's always kind of an uphill battle to convince people that this is something worth trying. And it would be even harder to think that something like this would be, possible to become a thing I can work on full time. So looking back, I think it's pretty amazing that all of this have worked in the way it has. Um, and I guess the way I overcame it was just really persistence. Yeah.
Did you ever think that it would get this big? Was that like the dream in the beginning, or you just wanted something that worked better and it just kind of grew?
Yeah.
Next one is, and I think this is an interesting side of things because you talked about having to not being backed by a large corporation, but
Hmm.
like, what are some misconceptions people have about Vue, and how do you address them, especially like when they're comparing to React, for example?
Hmm. I think there are many different kind of misconceptions. Like in the early days, a lot of people think, oh, Vue is only for simple things because in the early days, the main way of people using Vue was through, direct script tags. So a lot of people combine that with a backend framework like Laravel. So that made some of the serious engineering people think, oh, this is just for the simple stuff. I think nowadays that misconception is no longer that prevalent. Most people know that Vue is capable of building very complex stuff. But I think on the DX side, there are still people who think, say, Vue has bad TypeScript support, for example. Usually these misconceptions coming from people who maybe touched Vue a few years ago and then haven't really played with it again. So their understanding of Vue stays like a few years back, right? Some of people still think Vue doesn't play nice with TypeScript. Some of them think that Vue is still options API and therefore doesn't have the flexibility of React hooks. Some people don't even know Vue can support JSX. For example, I think a few days ago I posted a tweet showing people that you can actually use JSX inside of Vue single file component, and it just blew up because like a lot of people were like, "Wait, I didn't know you can do this." Uh, so yeah, I think in a way, Vue is very much uh, like I guess a lot of people, users of other frameworks, probably have a pretty outdated perception of Vue if they haven't been following up of the updates and changes we've shipped in the past few years, right? So that's definitely something I hope to change. I'm actually working on a blog post um, because Vue is approaching its 10-year anniversary. Actually, technically, the anniversary date is a bit blurry, so I usually use February, the first time I announced it publicly, as the Vueanniversary, right? So we're approaching that. So close to 10 years, I'm trying to write a blog post that just like looks back at the 10 years we've been working on Vue and how Vue has evolved over time. And through that, I hope to show some people who maybe haven't followed along for quite a while to see, oh, like there's, despite it being a 10-year-old framework, Vue has been consistently evolving and improving, and it's I can confidently say Vue is in its best shape, right? So and it'll get even better in the future.
That I mean that makes me excited about the Vue anniversary.
Yeah,
And congratulations, almost like basically 10 years. That is crazy.
yeah.
Only a few days away. What if we took a little bit of look in the past, if we think about the future, what are some new and exciting features and functionalities that you see coming in future versions?
Obviously, vapor mode is going to be probably the biggest thing, but it's more like it's kind of like a standalone thing that's going on in parallel with the regular minor releases that we're making right now. So for 3.5, it's already in planning stage. But for the so essentially the way that we are planning the new features right now is the main branch in the current repository is going to be focused on relatively small, non-controversy or like low, like no migration cost features. Like 3.5, 3.6. Mostly they will contain up maybe 5 to 6 kind of medium-sized features that's not going to be groundbreaking, but usually gives you a good quality of life improvement, solves a pretty specific problem, improve your development experience and all that. Right, 3.4 actually contained some of the bigger changes we've shipped in quite a while because it contained a big refactoring of the reactivity system. It contained a complete rewrite of the parser. Right, so 3.5, 3.6 probably going to be some relatively smaller things, like type improvements. We're actually working on improving some of the component related types to make it easier for you to manipulate component types in userland. There have been requests for things like use ID to generate unique IDs during server-side rendering to improve the consistency between server-side rendered markup and the client-side behavior, right? So these have been requested, but usually these are relatively concrete, small chunk of features. That's not going to be like this. Oh, this next big thing, right? The next big thing is Vapor, and that one is going on in parallel with these smaller features.
Very cool. And I I feel like the next question goes into this one, but you talked a little bit about because it's like what you're most excited about for 2024, and you
Mhm.
mentioned everything there, but also the Vue anniversary,
Yeah.
Vueversary. What else are you most excited
University.
about?
What else am I most excited? So there are some pretty exciting things happening on the Vite side. Obviously, we're working on roll down. So roll down is going to be the new bundler that supports Vite internally. We have some pretty big plans around this whole, you know, roll down supporting Vite and roll down playing with other, rustified tool chains. We just think with the Vite ecosystem out there, there's a good opportunity for us to think about how we can, improve the overall JavaScript tooling ecosystem in a more fundamental way, I guess. Uh, there's some plans that I can't really share just yet, but in
Stay
the
tuned.
in the yeah, in the second half of the year, there will be some pretty exciting stuff.
Do you see anything evolving with the reactivity system?
Um, Reactivity system. So there has been this TC39 group that's been working on standardization of signals for quite a while now. I don't, unfortunately, I don't really have the energy to like follow into every like detailed discussion in that group. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of it is just very detailed technical discussions, bike shedding on API design and stuff. But I think a good sign is people are seriously working on this, and if signals can actually be standardized, there's a good chance that Vue can maybe leverage it in a future version. Um, and so that means we ship less code. We have a more consistent and reliable reactivity system, and we also have hopefully better performance because it's going to be implemented by the engine in native code. So, but this is kind of out of the Vue scope, right? It's kind of like
Right.
cross framework standards work where we hope that we can eventually leverage as a framework.
It's interesting just having to think back and I've seen this over time of like seeing how intricate everything does piece together, but they're also very different areas of what goes into each of them and the focus.
Mhm.
So thank you for going over that again.
Yeah.
What is some of the most inspiring projects you've seen built with Vue, and what lessons can we learn from them?
Hmm.
I'm going to add to this
Inspiring.
also, what's the
Mhm.
biggest?
The biggest, biggest in
So
terms
both.
of, I guess it's a difficult question because when you think about inspiring, I guess some people build amazing interactive experiences with Vue, right? So because there are open source projects built related to Vue, there are end products built with Vue. I think one that kind of touches upon both is the Elk project, right? So Elk is this Mastodon client built with Nuxt. Uh, and yeah, it's basically a Twitter interface that talks to Mastodon client servers, and I think it's very impressive because it's built in the open. It's a pretty production level, complex UI, so and it just uses all the latest and best features that the state of art frameworks that has to offer. I think it's a good testimony of the capability of Vue, and people, and I think it's amazing that the Elk folks. It's really a few people that built this in their spare time for fun, and they're able to build something like that. Think about how many people they had at Twitter building the Twitter web client, right? So I think that's pretty inspiring. Um, and outside of that, we've seen really a lot of pretty amazing contributions in the ecosystem, you know, in the past year for Vue 3, especially since more people are completely moving over to Vue 3. We're seeing more component libraries. Um, we're seeing like Trust.js, which is this 3D renderer built on top of Vue. Um, we have people porting a lot of the React stuff like Radix UI and ShatCN to Vue. So all of this, I think, it's always cool to see people, excited building on top of Vue. Um, and in terms of, the more end user facing stuff, I actually keep a pretty long list of known Vue use cases whenever I see a website that uses Vue. Um, I think a lot of times really like you see because the public facing things are usually pretty simple, like a company landing site that's built with Nuxt, right? Exciting, but it's not too much of a technical uh, like there's not too much to admire. I guess the great thing is Nuxt and Vue makes it super easy for them to build this kind of stuff, right? But outside of that, I think some of the examples will be like GitLab is built with Vue, right? And things like a lot of the luxury shopping sites, like Louis Vuitton, is built with Vue, and it's
Okay,
a
that's
pretty good
pretty
one.
cool.
Yeah, um, yeah. So these are the ones that comes to mind, really. But I do have a full list of things that I collect in a spreadsheet. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And I feel like that I'm curious if you had things that you had like a list of things that helped you like figure out what
Mhm.
features and design you wanted to do. So, like, what frameworks and libraries or concepts most significantly influence the design and features of Vue? Did you have a folder like that before you designed Vue?
I don't keep a list of things like that, but I can definitely just list them here. Like obviously the initial version of Vue was inspired by Angular 1. You still see the directive syntax that's directly taken from Angular. The component model um, is very much inspired by React in a way. Composition API is inspired by React hooks to a certain extent, although they work very differently. I would say the reactivity system view is heavily influenced by Knockout and Meteor Tracker, which is the reactivity system in the Meteor framework. Um, and single file components like 3.2 script setup is inspired by Svelte, uh, the way that we just removed all the boilerplate and make the script and the template in the same scope. So there are a lot of these little things that we take cues from other frameworks or other libraries. But the key is we are always thinking about how it can fit into Vue in a way that makes sense. Right? It's because Vue is still Vue after all these years, after we taking all these inspirations from different sources. But what makes this unique is the way that we put them together to make them a coherent thing that still stays true to what people liked about it.
That's pretty cool. And I like how you have those examples too, because I feel like when people think about open source, sometimes people can forget that you can build on top of other
Yeah.
journeys, so that way it works best for you. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I'd argue the whole point of open source is that you can learn, use, and build upon each other's work, right? That's the whole
Hmm.
ethos of open source. And in a way, it's like, scientific, like scientists or researchers, they always like, if they write a paper, they always quote all these other papers to
Hmm.
make sure like because this is the only way we can make progress. You have to build upon something. You can't just invent something completely new out of nothing, right?
Follow up on that one. Do you have it can be scary putting your code or a project or something out there and not saying, "Hey, this is mine. No one touch it. Don't
Hmm.
touch it." But like
Hmm.
how was that something that you like any words of advice for people that are starting off their projects or like thinking about sharing open source?
I mean, even if you put it out there, you still have full control over what goes into it, right? So people can submit pull requests, but it doesn't mean you have to accept them, right? As long as you have a good faith discussion on why you want or do not want those changes to be merged, I think people will understand, right? Because if you have very specific uh, expectations about how your users should interact with your project, just make those expectations clear up front. Nobody's gonna be offended about it, right? It's okay to have some code out there and just say, I'm just putting it here. I'm not accepting any changes. Or you can put it out there and say contribution welcome. And even better, if someone want to take over this and just like keep maintaining it, that's even better, right? Different people will have different, ways of dealing with the code they put out there. It's completely up to you.
Thank you. Okay, up next. Besides Vue, what other tools and frameworks are you working on right now?
As I said, Vite is obviously still a big thing, and then Rowdown, which is the bundler that's going to be supporting it. So, in a way, I guess Vue is still the main project that I'll be writing code myself. On the Vite and Rowdown side, I'm more like a coordinator that tries to pull the right people to work on the things that I think would benefit the users the most. So it's kind of like a mixed kind of work, I still think it's really important for me to write code, but at the same time, a lot of the responsibilities in some of the other projects is more like a manager of sort, which is a term I kind of hate to use, but I'm just more like trying to make sure there are interested people that's working on problems that's worth solving.
Do you find it hard to like switch between like the two ways of thinking of being like coding because like that's individual where like
Hmm.
project management or management is overall strategy?
I don't think the switching is hard. I think the more challenging part is switching context between the different projects. It's because they are
Mm,
dealing with very different problem domains, right? So when even like within Vue, when you're in like solving a specific runtime problem, and maybe for a specific issue or bug, like say recently we had to deal with a lot of reactivity system regressions, and when you are in that context for a very long time, then you jump out to deal with a compiler problem. It's like, oh, this is a completely different thing now. Like you're doing context switching even within the framework, right? So that can happen quite a lot. So I think that's probably the most challenging part because, for example, if I worked on Vue for a few weeks and I dig into a Vite problem, it will take me some time to kind of get back all the context to be able to efficiently reason about it. So that's difficult, but I think it's lucky that we have a lot of talented people working on Vite now. So I don't have to like completely understand everything that's going on in Vite right now, which is in my opinion is a good thing. Yeah.
that is pretty cool. Um, and back to the more techie questions of will Vue 3 continue to support Webpack or will it totally move to Vite?
It's still supported. We are still maintaining the latest version of Vue Loader, right? So if you see with 3.4, we actually released a new version of Vue Loader. The maintenance cost is acceptable, so we don't really see a reason to drop it anytime soon.
Awesome. And will VTest ever natively support testing Vue components while built with composition API that uses ref reactive?
Um, I'm not sure if I understand this question, but because
Will
I
VTest
think it already
support
does.
testing? Yeah.
Yeah, so I assume the person who's asking this question has run into some issues, but I I can't really answer this question unless I know more details about what specific problems you're running into.
For whoever posted this one, just send more details in the chat and we'll see if we can follow up on that one. Next question. The suspense component is marked as an experimental feature. Do we have plans of releasing the stable one?
Yeah, so this has been on the roadmap for quite a long time. The thing with suspense is that um, definitely should have done it this sooner, but we probably need a good RFC document of outlining the problems it's trying to solve, the use cases, and so that the users will have some input on whether the current design actually solved those problems properly, and give them also an opportunity to express like what problems they've run into in the current implementation. Um, so this is something we should probably do in the next minor or the one after that. So yeah, so this is definitely something we want to stabilize.
Okay, thank you. And in which version of Vue will the options API no longer work? Because while migrating sometimes, there is still a mix in large projects. Do you have a schedule for this?
We don't plan to remove Options API. So that's the thing, right? The way Options API currently works in Vue 3 is that it's very easy to support it on top of Composition API. So the cost of keep maintaining it is negligible. So we don't really see any reason to remove it. Um, we definitely are encouraging users to use composition API because we believe that with the current way it goes, it just offers a more consistent experience in terms of, and also it just prevents you from running into scaling issues when you have to deal with more complex cases. Uh, Potentially better usage with TypeScript, and also Vapor mode will initially only support composition API. So there are a lot of reasons to move to composition API if you can, but we don't really plan to remove options API at any point.
Good to know. And let's see, next question. I know we're bouncing a bit back and forth on these. What advice do you have for developers who are just starting out?
Advice would be just have fun and build things you are interested in. I think for me, the journey of learning to build stuff is always very goal oriented. I always try to envision something I want to build first. Like say, this is the app I want to build. Once I have that in my mind, it's much easier to figure out all the steps necessary to get there. Right? I think if you're just learning for learning's sake, it can sometimes get frustrating because you're like, it's so hard to understand this section. I don't even know what they're for, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's easier if if you know like this is the app that I want to build. I'm just gonna learn whatever is needed to make that thing happen. Uh, and I think that's a faster way of learning. You'll end up with somewhat incomplete knowledge once you get there, but you can always come back and fill in the rest, right? I think the key is to get from zero to something first, and then fill out the other smaller details.
Follow up on that one. If it's like somebody, developer just starting with Vue, how a lot of developers are coming from React because it's so well known and it's a lot of like
Mhm.
tribal knowledge there. Like, what do you see is, do you have suggestions for developers that are switching from React to Vue on making that a bit
Mhm.
easier?
Um, I think the way that React and Vue are obviously have a lot of similarities, the way components work, the way that you can compose things. Uh, I think one big thing to realize is that composition Vue composition API still is a completely different execution model compared to React hooks. So React hooks runs over and over again, but in Vue, you try to set up the relationship between your state once at the component setup, and then you just let the system run automatically, right? So it's a different way of thinking about how state flows in your application. I argue that for a lot of people, it's really like which one you find more intuitive, right? Some people like the way that React makes things look functional, but I think like this is my personal opinion. I think in many ways, React is creating a mismatch of expectations in where the host language, which is JavaScript, is a pretty imperative and mutable language, but it's trying to enforce a lot of the immutable functional patterns in the framework that's React. I think Vue tries to embrace the mutable and mutable nature of JavaScript, and then which we believe, in a way, the Vue's reactivity system, along with other similar systems like Signals, in general, I personally think they're more intuitive and uh, more aligned with the way JavaScript works. So that's just, I think this is probably the biggest difference between Vue and React, and that's the first thing you need to realize if you're switching.
Thank you. And you're really good at leading to the next questions without knowing that they're there. um, because just talking about like the current state of JavaScript, like, and
Mhm.
what's going on, where do you see it heading in the future?
Um, yeah, this one can be a bit controversial, right? Because I think React has gotten to a point where a lot of current React users are a little bit frustrated with the current state of React. Obviously, like first of all, we let's acknowledge that React is still obviously the biggest, most influential, most widely used framework. Um, Vue is probably the second in there, but compared to React, we are still kind of like, maybe a third or fourth of its usage across the globe. So React is still huge. Um, and its momentum is probably not going to slow down anytime soon, simply because it's like this kind of first mover advantage of just a lot of companies are using it. They're going to hire more people. People learn React for that reason. But I think it's got to a tipping point where a lot of current React users are like, we're not so sure about React is doing at the moment. Like we're not so sure about these new features React is trying to push. I think in a way React made a lot of big promises, but the delivery has been somewhat underwhelming in a lot of cases. And on the client side, I think React's development experience story hasn't really improved in the past few years. Um, it's really just riding on the ecosystem momentum that it had up to this point. And I think in that aspect, Vue is really catching up, right? With the Vue 3 ecosystem maturing and catching up. So yeah, personally for me, obviously I do hope more people uh, will be open-minded and be willing to try something different other than React, like rather than just say, oh, because it's the biggest, we're just gonna learn React. I think that mindset needs to change, and I think there's a good chance that we're going to see this change the next few years. Um, and obviously, React is pushing for server-side React server components, which I think it's turning React into something completely different from before. And in a way, it's trying to get going to and compete in a different arena compared to what what we traditionally call JavaScript frameworks, right? Because once it kind of involves a server counterpart, it's expanding the scope into solving more problems than it was originally intended for. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, uh, but at least I think for Vue, this is not an area that I think we are interested in pursuing, at least for the short term. I think this kind of problems can be better solved in the meta framework scope, say in Nuxt, because Nuxt can experiment with server components. Nuxt can do its thing. It's a much better place to do that kind of innovations. And I think the way that React is trying to completely bet itself on server components and then trying to push all its use towards it, I think this effort is a little bit misplaced. And I'm not sure if it's going to be the best move for React. That's just my personal opinion. Um, so, yeah.
That's good to hear, and also
Yeah.
how I hear a lot more React user or like developers go starting to explore more, which is pretty
Mhm.
cool. A couple more questions of is there any way of sending Vue components over the wire?
Currently, no. In a way, so I think this kind of sending components over the wire is interesting because obviously React Server components doing something like that. But if you think about if you're interested in the development model that does majority of the work on the server side and make the front end as light as possible, then maybe maybe HTMX is the easier solution there. Like in a way, I feel like frameworks like React and Vue are designed for relatively complex or highly dynamic applications. Obviously, it can be used to build simple things, but this kind of over-the-wire development model, uh, you can make it work with Vue if you really want to. I just feel like at that stage, you're really like, I want to use Vue, so I want to make it work over the wire. But if you're really just want over the wire kind of development model, then maybe something simpler will fit your mental model better. Like that's my opinion, right? I don't want to like distort Vue into something that it's not intended for.
I like that, and I think a lot of us try to see what something can do and then go, oh,
Mhm.
that might not fit in our mental model. I need to rethink of that. So thank you. Uh, all right, next question. Any reason defined model it can't be made deeply reactive for objects and arrays?
So the way V model works is, I think this has to do more to do with how V model works conceptually. The thing is, you need to think about V model expands to a value that is being passed in and an event emitter that sends back a new value to the parent. So in principle, you should always be generating a new value uh, on every update in the child. So if you are using an object as a V model, every time a change happens in the child, you should be sending back a fresh object or a fresh array to the parent. Right? So that's how you should think about it in theory, because if you want a deeply reactive object, then you don't even need vmodel at all. You can just pass a deep object down to the child and let the child mutate it, and things will still work. But we all know that's not really recommended because you shouldn't be mutating props. So essentially the idea here is that you don't really want to pass down a deep object for the child to just arbitrarily mutate. Because if the child can mutate it in any way it can, then later at a later time, you'll have a harder time. So the parent will have a harder time tracking down how this thing has been changed, right? If the only way it can be changed is by the child sending in a new object or a new array, it makes your whole data flow clearer, because now you know, like, when you're trying to say how does it change, when does it change, you can always just look at how when the object is actually replaced, instead of trying to track down how the child component is doing weird things about it.
That's a good way of thinking about it. Thank you. I'm also just like wrapping my head around it at the same time. All right, second to last question. VitePress is the spiritual successor of VuePress. When will VitePress have a production release?
So, as a matter of fact, I think VPress is ready. We actually were working towards a production-ready release for a very long time, and I think we got that like in early January, maybe end of December. It's just that we've been busy with other things, and we want to give it a proper announcement. So, like, we need to make sure everything is working, and then we need to have an announcement, blog post, and everything. But effectively, it is largely ready, and we're probably going to do in 1.0 like anytime.
Yay. And I got a couple more questions that were submitted, so I'll grab those. Uh, what's your thought on the future of front end development using Vue alongside AI?
Um, I think in the short term, there's not going to be anything significant, because I personally tried all the things that has to do with front end with AI, like Framer AI, like V0. There's also someone who built a Vue version of V0 called Vue 0, that allows you to use a prompt to generate UI. I think they look cool on the first try, but when you try to use it for something real, it really falls short really fast. So I'm not sure if like we are close to any real advancement here. So I think currently the most useful way of using it is still kind of, Vue Copilot, or maybe, just like when you're typing, when you're working on actually writing code yourself, the AI can give you good hints, good support. It can give you, answers to very, commonly seen questions. Um, it can definitely improve your efficiency in a lot of ways, right? But in a way, I still see AI as mostly a support tool in our toolkit, right? So I don't really see, say we're getting to like AI generating a fully production ready application anytime soon. Um, that's probably going to still take a decade, I think.
Okay, I like it. So for how did you say it? Vueversary, 20th Vueversary?
Universary.
Vueniversary. So for
Yeah.
the 20th Vueniversary, we might be able to have more insight there. Um, and what would be the best native option for Vue nowadays? Like React has React Native.
Uh-huh. I would say just check out Native Script. Um, Native Script is actually framework agnostic, so and they've been supporting Vue 3 for quite a while now. I've seen a few apps built with Vue 3 plus Native Script in the wild, And as far as I know, you can even use native script to build for Apple Vision Pro. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think this is really the only viable production ready solution if you really want a native app with Vue. And other than that, things like Ionic, it's not truly native, but you can get to a pretty good point if your app is not super reliant on having very fancy UI per se.
Interesting. Okay. Last two questions is there anything that you wish we asked you about that we haven't?
No, I think they really touched upon a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about.
Yay. And last question, do you have any requests, see if I can talk today, requests of the community?
Request of the community. I No, I think honestly, like the Vue committee has always been giving me more than I could hope for. It's always been supportive. It's always been, very welcoming. And I guess if there's a request, I want to everyone just to keep the good vibes going and make sure the Vue community stays the best community out there.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank
Yeah.
you, Evan, for joining us today.